And so I thought I would talk today about hiring a property manager versus doing it yourself. And so this is one of the big questions I get, especially from like first time investors. And they ask me, oh my gosh, like, do I need to hire a property manager? I just have this one rental, or am I capable of doing it myself? And so I want to talk about this, and I'm going to give you a disclaimer. Obviously, I am a property manager, so I'm going to be a little bit biased, but I'm going to try to give you like as unbiased opinion as I can about it. Um, because even before I was a property manager, I did self manage my rentals. So kind of have done both. So, first, I wanted to talk about the financial costs about it. Obviously, hiring a property manager is going to be more expensive than doing it yourself. Just like everything, hiring a contractor is more expensive than doing it yourself. But that's like with an asterisk, because if you try to do it yourself and mess it up, it can be a lot more expensive down the road, right? But in most cases, a property manager is going to cost you more. Generally, it's going to be 8 to 10% of the monthly rent on an ongoing basis. With a listing fee, some companies charge like half the first month's rent. Some charge an entire first month's rent. Some, like my company, charges a flat fee because it's the same amount of work no matter how much the rent is. So it's you just kind of have to go company to company to see what they do there. But there's that listing fee, and that's to do the make ready, like flip the house over and do any repairs, get it cleaned, get the lawn mowed, find the new tenant, get the lease signed, onboard the tenant, all of that. And then sometimes you really have to be careful because sometimes property management companies will charge a lower percentage of monthly rent. So they might charge like 8% versus 10%, but then they'll upcharge any maintenance by like 10 or 15%. And so if you start doing the math, if you have to get a new water heater that year and they upcharge you 15% of that, well, that's going to be a lot more than 2% of the monthly rent would have been all year. So just make sure you're comparing apples to apples if you are looking at different property managers. If you do it yourself, you still have costs. It's still going to cost you money to find a tenant because you're going to have to, buy a lockbox, buy signs, buy, your gas to go back and forth to the rental. I know when I did this myself, like when I self-managed my little rentals before I was a realtor, it was really frustrating because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't like group showings. So I would just, anytime anybody was interested, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'll be right there. Well, I'll meet you there in 10 seconds and drive across town to show it. And then they wouldn't show up or something. So there is, a kind of a frustrating amount of travel time and costs involved with that. Another thing that really sucks is that Zillow has started charging to list its rentals. So they even have started charging like realtors. The MLS used to syndicate to Zillow, but now it won't unless you pay this fee. So it's $10 a week. So the average days on market for rentals over the last few months has been around 30. So, I mean, that's only $30 if it's on for 3 weeks, or maybe 40, $40. I can do math, I promise. If it's on for a month. And so, not a huge cost, but there is a cost involved. And then the cost of creating your own lease. So you have to have a state specific lease. A lot of property managers will just use the TAR lease, the Texas Association of Realtors. Sometimes you can get a lease from a realtor that way, or you can buy, like I know my friend Miriam has rentals and she bought her lease at Office Depot, I think. They have little kits or there's online sites, but there are ways that you can get one and those all cost money. So those are kind of the different costs you're going to have. Obviously, much less if you're doing it yourself than if you are hiring a property manager. And then the other cost, the time commitment. If you are hiring a property manager, a lot of the time is going to be upfront where you are hopefully interviewing several property managers to see who you're a good fit with and who you trust the most. And then you're establishing that relationship, getting set up with them. Like there's some communication time, there's like setting up the financial transactions time, things like that. That's going to be like the bulk of your time. Every once in a while, you're going to get a communication from them, usually when repairs are over a certain dollar amount. So I think we use $300. So if a repair is over $300, then we will call or text or email the owner and just make sure they're okay with that before we go ahead and spend that. So, you will field an occasional communication, but it's usually very passive, like it's an email to reply to or a text or something. So it's not a huge amount of time whatsoever. But then you still also have to do paperwork and taxes, and you usually get a monthly statement that you should review. We talk about like managing the manager, so you want to be doing that. So there is still some time involved even if you have a property manager. If you're DIYing this, then the biggest part of your time commitment is going to be upfront finding the tenant, or when a tenant moves out, that in between time. So you're going to be doing a make ready, which can be, depending on how bad the previous tenants left the house, can be quite involved. But you're going to have to find contractors to fix various things. Even really good tenants, there's going to be a few little things here and there. And at the very least, you've got to get the locks changed and make sure the smoke alarms work and little things like that. So you're going to have to coordinate that. You're going to have to coordinate somebody coming in and cleaning, maybe carpet cleaning as well, some lawn care. So you're going to have to kind of make sure that the house is ready and then list it, put it online, put it on Facebook Marketplace, put it all these places, coordinate showings, answer the phone, talk to a bunch of tenants, and then, find one, go through the application process. So that's the bulk of self-managing your properties, in my opinion, anyway. That's what I feel like I spent the most time doing. So if I had to get a new tenant, I would say I think you're looking at like 20 to 40 hours of work, depending on how the state of the house when the previous tenants leave. You're putting in about that much work to turn over the house and find a new tenant. And then once you have a good tenant in the property, it's not really that hard. I think I'd probably get one or two calls or texts a year per tenant with random maintenance or repair items. I've never had an issue, knock on wood, with rent payments. So I've been blessed with really, really good tenants, but you might have to deal with rent payments if that gets to be an issue. But the bulk of that time is in that first part of like finding a tenant. And I would say I didn't put this in the PowerPoint, I should have, but that's also the bulk of the risk when you're finding the tenant, because the biggest things that you can get in trouble for as a landlord are discrimination. So there are fair housing laws, and you just have to be really, really careful that nothing you do is going to be discrimination. And there can be some things when I first started and I read through the fair housing laws, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought that would be discrimination, right? So, like you can't even ask, you're not even supposed to ask like if people have kids, like to that level. So you have to be careful and you have to know the laws, and that can be kind of a risky time in the whole process. Okay, and then your energy. So you have the cost, financial cost, the time, and then energy. The property manager is going to take on like the day-to-day stress. You're not going to get a phone call in the middle of the night where somebody has put a bunch of wipes down the sewer and the septic tank has backed up into the house and they're yelling at you. That's not going to happen to you. It's going to happen to me. That's that kind of stress, texts and calls from tenants is you get to avoid that, which can be really stressful for some people. A good property manager will do inspections and kind of warn you about things that are upcoming, like say, hey, the tree is kind of growing into the roof and, we probably need to think about getting it trimmed soon. Things like that. Or like I have a property manager in Midland where I had a home, and they had a really bad hailstorm, I guess. I didn't even know they had a hailstorm. Like, I don't pay attention to Midland, Texas, but my property manager drove around and looked at the houses and said, you need to make an insurance claim. The roof is bad. And, so I didn't have to worry about that. My property manager let me know, hey, you've got a problem. And then, like I said earlier, managing the property manager, making sure you look through the statements, make sure you're being charged correctly, looking at maintenance invoices and just kind of double checking to make sure you're not either by accident because you're managing several properties, and if file one under the wrong property, like that's an innocent mistake, or just being charged way, way, way too much for a water heater or something. You just got to kind of take a look at it at least once a month. If you're doing it yourself, you're going to have the stress. Again, the bulk of the stress is going to be dealing with the tenant search. I think that just from my own experience before I was a realtor and I was managing myself, and from like my friends that are self-managing, it can be really frustrating to deal with tenants and showings. And if you're in the business, you realize that half of tenants don't show up to their showing appointments, and you don't take that personally. But when I was managing my own property, I definitely did take it personally and felt very stressed about it. So that can be tough. And then I also felt very, very stressed anytime my house was vacant. I would just be freaking out until I got a tenant in. And so, now I freak out for other people's houses when they're vacant. So, just that time is really stressful. Dealing with tenants, again, sometimes, you can have excellent tenants, and they can have, cause you no stress. They keep your house clean, they keep your house nice and never call you, and it's great. So I don't want to make it sound like self-managing is so impossible because tenants are so difficult. Most of them aren't. Most of them are great. At least in the areas of town where I manage, most of them are super awesome. So dealing with tenants sometimes though is going to be stressful, and you have to have the mindset, that that's going to happen, and you have to be able to roll with things. And then, like I said before, making sure you obey all of the laws, like knowing the codes that you have to change the locks and where the smoke detectors have to be and where peepholes have to be and all of these things. It's a lot. And especially if you're new, it can feel like overwhelming. And so sometimes it's nice to have somebody else to kind of help you with that. All of that being said, when somebody asks me after they buy their first rental, if they are local, I always recommend that they self manage, because I think that it teaches you so, so much. It teaches you what to look for in a property manager, it teaches you what to expect. I think you learn a lot about it. I think you learn a lot about what tenants want. So when you're buying the next property, if my first property was really small, like 1,200 square feet. And so I quickly figured out, like, oh, this is a little too small. It's harder to find a tenant because it's a little too small for the neighborhood. And I got that because I was interacting and showing the house and people saying, like, oh, this is too small for me, you know? So there's kind of a level of familiarity you get with the process and with the neighborhood and with your house and with everything, the whole process, that you aren't going to get if you hire a property manager. There's just a level of expertise that I think is really helpful for your investing journey. If you are deciding to self manage, the book is called Managing Rental Properties by Bigger Pockets. It's the one written by Brandon and Heather Turner. That book is my favorite real estate book of all time because it is just like start to finish. Here's how you rent out a house, like the whole process. And when I bought my first rental house, I bought that book, and you can literally go chapter by chapter. Like, here's how you list it. And then when you get done with that chapter, you do it, you list it. Okay, now what's next? Here's how you screen tenants. And then you do it like literally step by step. So easy. And then it comes with some free forms for like all of the different forms you could need. other than a lease, because leases are very state and situation specific. But it comes with forms that have like rules and suggested like deposit rules and like a form for that and a move in, move out form, like just everything you can need. And it's really simple to just like make a logo and slap it at the top of those. And it looks like way more official than you feel like you have any business looking. And that's awesome. Some of them do need to be tweaked a little bit. Like one of the rules in the form provided by that book is that you can't have firearms. And that's just not practical for Texas, especially close to all these military bases. It's just not really like a rule that people are going to follow. So I went ahead and took that one out. But you kind of figure out how you kind of tweak it to be specific to you. And then I wanted to talk about a third option that we don't often talk about. This is really good if you are, especially if you are local, or even I have a lot of investors who are like semi local, like maybe live in Austin who do this, but they'll have me or another realtor list the property and find the tenant, get the tenant onboarded, do all of that, and then they take over the management. And so that really helps because it saves that ongoing 8 to 10% management fee. But like I said throughout the whole time, most of the work, most of the money, most of the energy goes into finding the tenant and screening and getting the lease and all of that. So if you hire somebody else to do that part and then you just kind of they hand the baton to you and you keep going, you're cutting out most of the hard work, but then you're saving that cash flow every month. So I think that that's a really good option. And I definitely encourage investors, especially if you're somebody who's really busy and finding a tenant is going to be really challenging, then that's a really good way to still get the experience of self-managing without like having a long vacancy because you really didn't have time to find the tenant, if that makes any sense.